One of the worst parts about getting older is that suddenly all of the people you love, who used to be able to see daily or near daily, are now spread across the country and the world. The internet can help to some degree, but nothing can beat time spent together in person with people you have strong, genuine friendships with. What, is this not what you expected a video about driving across Canada to open with? Or why do you think I drove all the way across the country in the first place? For fun? No, I hate driving. That's a joke, by the way. I love driving. Anyway, here's some context. As I was approaching graduation from university in 2020, I was planning a trip to see my friend Cass, who had recently moved back out to Ontario. And then for some reason, everything shut down and I was unable to do so. In the time between then and now, my friend Max also decided to abandon me and moved out to Montreal, adding a second stop to my itinerary. So, here we are 3 years later, and I'm finally following through. I only had 2 weeks rather than an open window of time, and I wasn't exactly financially prepared, but I'd waited long enough. I was going to make this happen whether I could afford to or not. So here's what happened the time I quit my job and drove across the country. Those two acts are completely unrelated and just so happen to coincide, but it makes it sound more dramatic, so I'm sticking with it. I could barely sleep on Saturday night, and for all intents and purposes, I really didn't. My body was pulsing with excitement from the race night, and each time I shut my eyes, I was back in the driver's seat, running in circles. I may have gotten a few moments of rest, but never once do I think my body succumbed to true REM sleep. I was really just counting down the minutes until my 2:30 alarm would allow me to give up on these futile attempts at rest. My goal was to catch the 6:15 ferry in order to avoid long lineups and delays. And that plan worked. The drive out was largely uneventful, if not somewhat disappointing in terms of fuel economy. While I can usually average between 2.8 to 3.2 liters per 100 kilometers if I take the Old Island Highway, this time I, somewhat embarrassingly, only averaged 3.5. My excuse is that the hybrid battery was drained at the start, so it spent the majority of the drive just recharging that, which meant it was difficult to get the fuel economy to remain low, even on declines or flat ground. Thankfully, the battery had reached a full charge by the ferry, and the drive through Vancouver was actually surprisingly efficient, particularly while I was able to draft behind this large camper trailer. Honestly, I rarely find drafting to be worthwhile, as you usually wind up needing to slow down and accelerate more than you usually would in order to stay close enough to the vehicle you're following behind, and that kind of zeroes out any gains you might see. But if you find a vehicle traveling at a consistent or similar pace to yourself, like this truck and trailer were, there is a noticeable difference. While drafting, my real-time fuel economy display would hover just under the 2 liter per 100 kilometer mark, and then when I lost that truck and trailer for a little while, it was hovering just under 4 liters while going the same speed with similar road conditions. This first day was an easy and familiar drive for me. No need for Google Maps. Just follow the Highway 3 signs until you wind up in Penticton. It's always interesting coming from the island, where these massive mountains are merely a backdrop beyond the sea, to being right in the belly of the beast, with the beast being the mountains, of course. Unfortunately for the insight, being engulfed by mountains means plenty of hill climbing, which isn't exactly this car's strong suit. It's a good thing there were next to no other cars on the road, since I was consistently slowing down about 20 kilometers per hour by the time I reached the crest of each climb. I only made one stop, other than the ferry if you count that, and that was at the top of Sunday Summit, an elevation of 4,206 feet. And that was just to grab a picture I'd wanted to take the last time I'd driven out to Penticton. This picture. I arrived in Penticton around 12:30, so I had absolutely no need to leave as early as I had. But I'd be spending the night with my dad's family, and initially I thought I'd just be showing up and saying hi, going to bed, and then leaving before they'd even woken up. So it was nice to actually have an afternoon to spend with them. In total, I drove around 567 kilometers today. I say around because when I left in the morning I forgot to reset the trip odometer for a few blocks, but really that shouldn't be a difference of more than like 1 or 2 kilometers, so who even cares? Forget I ever said anything. By the time I reached Penticton, my average fuel economy reading was 3.6 liters per 100 kilometers. I'd gotten it down to 3.4 through Vancouver, and it had gotten as bad as 3.8 heading through the hills. But really, especially considering the poor start in the morning, 3.6 is solid. And pretty average for this drive based on past experiences. Monday morning, my body was ready as I woke up under my own volition mere moments before my alarm was set to go off. Quickly, I had my things back in the car and I was on the road around 4 a.m. There were two possible routes that Google Maps was suggesting for today's travels. One going along Highway 3, which would see me going through Fernie, and another going along Highway 1, which would see me going through Banff. Since I've been to Fernie many times before, I decided to go with the Banff route, which was also supposedly the more efficient path. Allegedly, I have been to Banff before, but I harbor no memory of the occasion, so as far as I'm concerned, my parents were probably just trying to gaslight me again. As I drove through the Okanagan Valley, I was surrounded by mountains, lakes, and a stunningly slim and shimmering crescent moon. Not that you can make that out from any of my footage. On my first day of traveling, I'd been following familiar and known roads, so I listened to familiar music. But today, things were changing. These were new roads taking me to new places. So I figured it was time to start listening to some of the music that my friends had recommended to me for this journey of mine. Alright, well I just listened to Whatever People Say I Am, That's What I'm Not by the Arctic Monkeys. That was a recommendation by Matt. And I really liked it. I really dug it. I will definitely be re-listening to that album. Here's a comparison that I'm sure has never been made, and I'm only making because of my really bizarre exposure to music. It's probably been made the other way around, but probably not this way. It sounded like a marginally less depressed version of Wank is how I would describe it. Yeah, I really liked the voice. I liked the lyrics that I could understand. Yeah, solid album. Definitely will be re-listening to, probably even on this trip. Alright. Okay, I just listened to Crazy For You by Best Coast. I believe that was a recommendation from Marina. I really liked the sound of that album. It was really kind of dreamy, really consistent sound. Lyrically, kind of too much of like a love song album for me. I usually am not the biggest love song fan, but yeah, I really liked it. I really liked the sound. I really liked the lyrics. Made me kind of smile a couple times. It felt very like just emotion based. I don't know. It was cool. Probably listen to it again as well. I don't know if I'll listen to it while driving though, because like I said, a little dreamy. It was very fitting for driving through the hills of the Okanagan though, but I don't want to fall asleep here. I need to stay awake. So I need something a little bit more pumped up, you know? Keep the energy up. Okay. I'd kind of forgotten that I'd be driving through the Rockies, so my gas mileage was nowhere near as good as I'd hoped. In my mind, after Penticton, I'd just kind of immediately be out of BC, and then the world would be flat, and I'd just be cruising, sipping on gas as I made my way through the prairie provinces. But no, I had to go through the Rockies before I'd get to see flat land. At its worst, my average fuel economy for this stint was 4 liters per 100 kilometers, which really is shameful. I should feel bad, and you should be angry at me. My first stop of the day was Golden, BC, which as I was getting closer to, I started to notice a change in the cars around me. I was seeing fewer and fewer BC plates and more Alberta plates, to the point where I wasn't seeing any BC plates at all. Do any British Columbians actually live in the Golden area, or is it purely a place for Albertans to hang out? Golden was around 400 kilometers from Penticton and about a third of the way I'd be traveling today, which is why it seemed like a perfect place to stop for lunch at 8:22 a.m. From there, I didn't go too far. I was making excellent time, so I figured I'd stop and see what all the fuss about Banff is about. Honestly, I'm not quite sure I went to the right place. I just kind of hung out at the park there for a little while. It was a lot like BC. I mean, there was even a guy just smoking weed in the park. And I kind of wanted to see something a little more than a cool bridge, a little town that reminded me of Fernie, and a merman. But some guy did compliment me on my frog hat, so the stop was definitely worthwhile. From Banff, I more or less didn't stop until Medicine Hat. Once I'd made my way into the heart of Alberta, and especially once I'd wound up in Saskatchewan, it became significantly harder to stop driving. I was no longer going through little towns every couple hundred kilometers or so. Now, if I wanted to stop, I'd have to pull off the highway to do so. And I wasn't about to do that. That's pure insanity. Well, one other thing I've noticed about driving through Alberta is that the drivers seem to like to follow pretty close behind you and pass pretty close to you, and they merge in really tight. But maybe that's not actually an Alberta thing. Maybe this is just, a case of this being the first time I've driven for a prolonged period of time on a major highway, and the majority of my driving has been on small city streets on an island. And I'm just not used to people being, aggressive and competent drivers. Just an interesting thing I've noticed. Been happening a lot more on the highways in Alberta than it did through BC though. Interestingly enough, the most fuel efficient part of this stint was going through Calgary. And that's mostly because the speed limits were lower. The insight is at its most fuel efficient traveling between 60 to 90 kilometers an hour, particularly between 60 to 70. And since there was a lot of construction, I was mostly going around 60. But thankfully, despite there being a lot of construction and this easily being the most traffic-dense section I'd experienced thus far, there was next to no stoppage. We were moving slow, but we never stopped moving. And it was great. I was loving it. But Calgary couldn't last forever, and soon the speed limit was up to a blistering 110. And as it turns out, the prairies aren't completely flat. They actually seem to be on a slight incline always somehow. Okay, I just listened to The Record by Boy Genius, and I think I'm going to enjoy this one more in a second listening. There were lots of lyrics that I enjoyed, and I liked the bigger variety in sound versus Phoebe Bridgers' solo albums. Both of her solo albums kind of made me teary on the first listen through. This one didn't. I think that's because it was a little more aggressive in the sound, maybe. That's the best way of describing it. It wasn't as melodic or slow-paced at points. I chuckled at the you treat me like an equal, but I'm better than you, and you should know that by now. Like, that was a good line. Solid album. Sorry, I didn't create sunscreen in my eyes. Anyways, at this point, I'd been driving for around 6 hours straight, and my body was starting to not be too happy about that. So I caved in and made a stop on the side of the road around South Esk to stretch. When I was rejoining traffic, I had to accelerate rather hard to get back up to speed. And much to my dismay, a little orange light decided to pop up on the dashboard. Well, shit. Check engine light just came on after I accelerated back onto the road. My guess is it's the battery. Pretty hot. I've asked it to, give me some assistance. Going, getting up to speed. That sucks. I'm gonna have to pull over here when I have a chance and take out the scan tool and see what it is. Okay, so it still tried to charge the battery as I slowed down, and the auto start stop still worked, so those are good signs. Okay, so it's PO420 O2 sensor. Not something serious, but really strange, because the catalytic converter on this car is quite new. I replaced it like 2 years ago. Not a lot of use on it. And I replaced the lower bank O2 sensor, so maybe the upper bank sensor needs to be replaced. I've cleared the code, I'll see if it comes back on, but even if it does, O2 sensors are not, that's not that big of a deal. I mean, it does affect clean burn in this car, so ideally I would
not like to have that code because it'll let it run more efficiently. But if we lose lean burn mode, that's not the end of the world. I can handle a faulty O2 sensor. I'm just relieved it wasn't the battery. I don't know what could have caused it to come on. Maybe because I had AC on for a bit and that made a different fuel mixture than it's used to. I don't know. I don't know. I'm running a higher grade fuel as well to try and avoid issues. So maybe that confused it, but regardless, it's just the O2 sensor. We're all good. I've cleared the codes. We're gonna keep on trucking and see what happens.
With the code cleared, I made my way back up to speed at a much slower and more cautious pace, feeling slightly less confident in my car's ability to handle this mildly excessive journey. My next stop was Medicine Hat, where gas was the lowest I'd seen yet, but honestly still not excessively cheap. With a slogan like the Gas City, you'd think they'd be giving the stuff away for free. But no, I still had to pay over $1 per liter. But soon enough, I was in Saskatchewan, where I spotted a sign for a park, and a few kilometers later, said park. It was literally just a gravel parking lot with 2 picnic tables in the middle and 2 dumpsters on either side of those tables and a giant Canadian flag. Is that what constitutes as a park around these parts? Man, I wish I'd grab some footage of it because it was honestly kind of funny to see.
Well, I guess I lied this morning because I just re-listened to Crazy For You by Best Coast. And I don't know, I wanted to listen to it again. The sound makes me think of like the Scott Pilgrim soundtrack and also kind of like
800 meters, turn right onto Saskatchewan 37 South.
And in 800 meters I'm turning onto Saskatchewan South. I don't know, I enjoyed it. I really liked the sound and I don't know, I wanted to listen to it again. I just thought I would mention that. I lied.
And then I was in Gull Lake to spend the night with my aunt and uncle. I arrived just before 7 p.m., which meant I actually had time for a nice little visit and dinner before crawling into bed to rest for tomorrow's travels. I put around 1,154 kilometers on the clock today, with an average fuel economy reading of 3.7 liters per 100 kilometers, and the average for the total trip thus far being exactly the same. In the original travel plans my mom had helped me draft up, I'd be driving to Kenora today. But based on how the last 2 days of travel had gone down, I had a feeling I'd be able to make it a bit further than that. So I set off from Gull Lake around 4 a.m., ready to see how far my car could take me. As the sun rose over the prairies, I was surprised to find myself really admiring the views. Both of my parents are from Saskatchewan, and I guess there's still a little prairie boy in me. I could see myself really enjoying parts of Saskatchewan, though I don't think I'd have the same affinity for it as I do the island. But who knows? Maybe I'd feel the other way around if I'd grown up here, but probably not.
Okay, I just listened to Elevator Music for an Elevated Mood by Corey Wong. I believe this one was also a recommendation by Max. I enjoyed it. I can't say I can think of a situation where I would actively choose to listen to it, though. When I listen to music, I like to have lyrics to sing along to. I'm not a huge fan of purely instrumental tracks. I think there were some tracks with lyrics. I enjoyed the one about the treehouse particularly. It was good though for some morning music when I, just wanted something to listen to as I was driving through Saskatchewan. It fit that criteria very well. Put that on the back of the album.
As I'd somewhat started to realize last night, Saskatchewan isn't perfectly flat, and it's not the ticket to unbeatable fuel economy I thought it would be. Part of the issue is that the highway speed limit is 110, but really it's that we're constantly going up slight inclines and down slight declines, and the declines aren't steep enough for me to coast down. So I'm just kind of always hovering right around the 4 liter per 100 kilometer mark on the real-time fuel economy display. My first stop of the day was in Regina, where I made my way to a gas station partly obscured by a road closure. I filled up with gas, checked my oil level and tire pressures, had a salmon sandwich my uncle had prepared for me the night before, and watched the new video Joel Haver had put out about call options before getting back onto the road. One thing I've noticed when driving into cities in this part of the country is there are rarely discernible road lines. I guess it makes sense that they'd all fade away from the harsher summer and winter conditions out here, but you'd think they'd have some kind of solution beyond people just somewhat intrinsically knowing where the lanes are supposed to be. I mean, we have little divots with reflectors in the roads out here. I think that would work, right?
I'm leaving Regina and the check engine light came on again. I'm assuming it's just the O2 sensor, but I'm gonna have to find a spot to pull over and double check. I don't know what's causing it. I did have to do a little bit of rapid acceleration again, so maybe that's it. Maybe it's the fuel door. Maybe I didn't close the fuel cap properly when I filled up. I don't know. But yeah, we'll pull over here as soon as we have a chance. Everything seems to be working normally though. It's O2 sensor again. Okay, so it must be something to do with accelerating hard, I guess, because otherwise everything's working fine. I don't know. That's frustrating. Oh well, at least it's just the O2 sensor. Not a big deal.
Hopefully this doesn't become a daily occurrence because honestly, the car's driving about as well as it ever has otherwise. So all I can really do is keep my fingers crossed and keep driving, because I'm not turning around now. After a bit, I started seeing signs for this place called Capel, which I thought was kind of funny, seeing as that roughly translates to what's it called in English. I wondered what it was actually originally called, and how Capel became the recognized name.
Okay, I just listened to Outdoor Activities by Cyberbully Mom Club, and as should be expected by this point, I really enjoyed it. One of these albums I need to be like, oh, it fucking sucks, but the video receiver just popped out there. Yeah, the last song, it's an EP, so it was only 15 minutes. The last song I'm positive I've heard before. It really sounded like a song off the Juno soundtrack. The album sounded like it could be off of the Juno soundtrack, is kind of the vibe it had. What else was I going to say? Oh yeah, I really liked the way that the vocals were layered, and you know, it kind of sounded like they were just making it up on the fly or messing up as they were going along. I always like it when songs sound like that, when it's like they're not really sure what the lyrics are, or they're singing it up not quite at the right time, especially if there's layered vocals and there's like a couple that are just slightly off time from the correct timing for the lyrics, I guess. Yeah, it's cool. Good little EP. Definitely see myself listening to it again and checking out more stuff by Cyberbully Mom Club.
Saskatchewan soon came to a close and I found myself crossing into Manitoba, a province I often tend to forget about. And I can't say my opinion of it is any higher after this trip, as Manitoba, it was not a fun province to drive through. Almost immediately upon crossing the province line, the roads became borderline undrivable. There were massive cracks that spread across the entire lane every 5 feet. It was like driving on railroad tracks. I was worried I'd bend a rim or blow a tire, blow a strut. It was rough. On top of that, the skies were suddenly filled with some kind of smoke. I wasn't sure if it was crop dust, wildfire smoke, pollution, or something else. But regardless, I wasn't overly keen on breathing it in. So I switched over to recirculated air, which meant my car started to get pretty muggy pretty quick. I'd switch on AC and wait until I was uncomfortably cold, switch it off, wait until I was uncomfortably warm, and start the cycle over again. It wasn't exactly what I'd call fun. So it didn't take long before I decided I needed a little break from Manitoba, and I pulled in at a truck stop, A&W in Virden. My sense of time was so incredibly warped by this point, I wasn't even sure if they'd be selling lunch items when I walked in. Thankfully, unbeknownst to me, there'd been an additional hour added when I crossed the Manitoba border, and it turns out it was actually just past 11, so they were selling lunch items, which is good because this felt like dinner time to me. Soon, I mustered up the courage to face the Manitoba highways once again. Now my driving force was just to get out of this province as quickly as possible. Needless to say, it hadn't set the best first impression on me, even though I've been in Manitoba before. Whew. The roads are finally smooth again. I'm still in Manitoba, but we've got smooth roads now, and it is a big improvement. As I was approaching Winnipeg, Google Maps decided to start making things even worse, as it tried to send me down a dirt road with a speed limit of 80 that I didn't feel comfortable going over 30 on for 11 kilometers. All to avoid a bit of construction that, already had an alternate route marked out for you to follow. So I turned back around and did my best to ignore Google Maps throwing a conniption fit, and guess what? I didn't even have to stop at the construction site. It was smooth and seamless to get through, but that was only the beginning. Because soon I found myself in a roundabout with a turnoff for Winnipeg and one for Portage-la-Prairie. Now, I was planning on driving past Winnipeg, so logic dictates I should take the turnoff that goes along the highway I plan on driving on and goes to the city I plan on driving past. But not according to Google Maps, who sent me through Portage-la-Prairie for no real discernible reason, other than to slow me down a bit and force me to spend a little more time in Manitoba. I think it's all part of a grand conspiracy to get you lost so you spend more time and money in Manitoba, because no one wants to visit it otherwise. Honestly, I was just feeling kinda pissed off at this point. Google Maps was making me angry, I was hot, thirsty, and just generally not very comfortable. So, despite my desire to not stop until I'd left this godforsaken province behind, I caved in and made one more stop just outside Winnipeg at one of the most bizarrely nice truck stop gas stations I've ever seen. It was also here where I think I might have been mistaken as a lot lizard. I was standing next to the building, texting my parents and some friends, and stretching my legs, when a white 90s Dodge Ram with one missing headlight pulled up and stopped at an angle in front of the space where I was standing, which wasn't really a parking spot, I don't think. As soon as they pulled up, I had a feeling about what was going on, and I immediately walked over to my car without making eye contact and got in. The moment I'd opened up the door to my car, the truck backed out and pulled over to the pumps instead. But as I was getting in, I glanced up and the driver was staring right at me. I quickly buckled myself in and drove off, and thankfully they didn't follow me. And it was also around here that Manitoba finally started to get a lot nicer. The air quality improved and the surroundings were no longer uglier versions of the Saskatchewan prairies, but rather kind of a light version of Ontario. Suddenly, I was flanked by trees on either side of the road, which was a nice change of pace from the often barren landscapes of the rest of Manitoba and Saskatchewan. With the trees back, it started to feel like I was just somewhere on the mainland, which I guess in a sense I was. The only thing missing was the mountains in the backdrop. And finally, I'd escaped Manitoba and had made it to Ontario. It was weird to enter Ontario and know I still had 2 days worth of driving before I'd be arriving in Welland, especially after crossing through 3 provinces today and the day before. But man, if it felt like I was back at the mainland at the end of Manitoba, entering Ontario felt like I was just straight up back in the Okanagan. As I made it into Kenora, I knew I wanted to keep going. So I pulled in at a gas station to look up hotels in nearby cities and settled on Dryden as my destination of choice. I feel like I easily could have made it to Thunder Bay, but it was getting late and I've never walked in and requested a hotel room on my own before. Hell, I've never even booked a hotel room on my own before, so I didn't want my first solo attempt at trying to find a place to sleep to happen past 10 p.m. if I could help it. I guess I could have booked a room from my car in Kenora, but that would have been too easy, right? No. I had to just keep driving and hope that when I got to Dryden there'd be a place with a room. But that seemed like a pretty safe bet to make on a Tuesday night. In total, I drove 1,260,000 kilometers today and averaged 3.6 liters per 100 kilometers. Things started off really inefficiently, and for the bulk of the day my average reading was 3.7. It actually didn't drop down to 3.6 until just around Kenora, so that's probably why the average for the entire trip so far is still at 3.7. I really thought the average would drop way down going through the prairies, but the opposite was almost true, so who knows? Maybe Ontario will be the province this car likes the most, or maybe it really is happiest just driving up and down Vancouver Island. Day 4 got off to a bit of a later start as the hotel I was staying at had free breakfast starting at 6 a.m. And I figured for the money I'd spent, I might as well at least get a nice breakfast out of it. So I had my free eggs Benny and hit the road. With this being my first hotel experience in quite some time, and my first solo one, it didn't hit me until I'd been driving for around 2 hours that I probably should have let someone at the hotel know that I'd left. So I pulled over and gave them a call. Thankfully all was good, and I was able to carry on my merry way.
I don't know if I got that, but there's a place called Pickle Lake. I just listened to corporate-sponsored Sunday School by Walker and Wild, and I was super impressed. The sound was awesome. Like, I really liked the mixing, I guess, like all of the different sound effects and stuff, and like the little intros to the songs. It sounded so pro. Like, it was awesome. Really impressive. I think my favorite song was the very last one. I just really liked the message of it. I had a hard time hearing some of the lyrics just because of being in a car and not knowing what the lyrics are. But yeah, really impressed with that album. This was recommended to me again by Max, who actually has a cameo on the album as a extra, I guess would be the word for it. Yeah, super cool. Definitely gonna listen to it again. Maybe not in a car so I can get the lyrics down. Really solid stuff.
My first stop of the day was in Thunder Bay, a place that I was expecting to have a little bit more of a presence. I pictured it as Victoria is to Vancouver, with Toronto being Vancouver and Thunder Bay being Victoria in this analogy. I'm not really sure why I pictured it this way. I'd just heard of it before, so I assumed it had to be big and important, I guess. Turns out, I think the only reason I knew of Thunder Bay at all was because my friend Jackson was born there. So really, it should be big and important. But, anyway, my stop in Thunder Bay was a little bizarre. I went into a Shell station to top up, and they only had 87, which, whatever. For the majority of the time I've owned this car, I only fill it up with 87 anyway. But I've been mostly using a mid-grade 89 or higher tier 91 for this trip, as a higher octane fuel will burn slightly better in lean burn mode. And I wanted to treat the car nicely since I am asking a fair bit of it. But after filling up, I went in to use their washroom, only to discover that it was out of order. But there was a second smaller Shell station literally just on the other side of the road, and they did have a functional bathroom. And as it would turn out, all the different grades of fuel. So what's up with that? Heading out from Thunder Bay, I was on a somewhat larger highway for a little while, where there was quite a bit of construction, but very few stops or even real slowdowns. As has been the case for pretty well this entire trip, I was once again more or less the only car on the road besides the city trucks. The speed limit was always 90 today though, even on the larger highways, which really just makes me appreciate how spoiled we've been on the island. The Inland Island Highway is 110, and was 120 for quite a while, and I guess that's kind of unusual. It seems like 90 is sort of the norm, which is interesting. But soon the highways gave way to what felt like the Ontario equivalency of the Old Island Highway, and the 90 km/h speed limit felt right. It is interesting though, the only city I'd been to before in Ontario was Toronto way back in elementary school when my aunt used to live out there. So I had it in my mind that that's just what Ontario was like. It was all big cities and freeways. But it turns out most of it is actually just lake water, with little cities every couple hours or so spread along single or double lane roads, which Honestly, I quite prefer, other than the fact that this meant options for stops and food was quite limited. Surprisingly, I was finding the driving today to be much more tiring than the past few days. My gas leg was going numb and my butt was feeling rather uncomfortable, and I was starting to feel quite peckish too. I really thought I'd be more worn out by the long, straight roads of the prairies, but no, it was the winding lake roads that were tiring me out. Even though, or perhaps because, it's a much more engaging driving experience. And the hills here too were proving to take more of a toll on the battery charge level than the hills in the Okanagan. Though perhaps the car was just allowing itself to discharge more after 2 days of very limited battery use.
Just listen to Shadow Glow by Flip Turn. I honestly am struggling to remember who recommended this one to me. I think it was Sarah. And I had a hard time hearing the lyrics and understanding them anyways. There were parts that I understood and there were lines that I liked when I did hear them. But I really liked the sound of it, and that's really what I was focusing on it while listening to, was just the overall musical aesthetic, which I really enjoyed. I thought that it was just a really solid sound. I really enjoyed it, and I'd be interested in trying to see what it's saying lyrically as well. See what kind of the narrative is. But yeah, as is to be expected, I enjoyed it.
I was really craving A&W again. What is it about A&W that makes it the go-to truck stop food place? And what's the American equivalent? But based on the billboards I'd been seeing, it didn't look like I'd be finding one to stop at anytime soon. And my hunger was starting to overpower my craving. And the insight had started to develop some hesitancy in lean burn mode. I screwed myself over with the 87 this morning. I was getting anxious to pull over, get some food, let the car rest, and check the fluids in case anything was awry. So I gave up on my A&W dreams for now and settled on a gas station Subway in Terrace Bay.
So I'm just leaving Terrace Bay. As I was entering after going down a big hill, I started having some hesitancy, some engine misfires in lean burn mode, which is a known issue that I'd had in the past. That's why I cleaned out the EGR plate. But I hadn't had that happen at all on this drive. Now my only guess is that maybe it's to do with the fuel octane rating. We're up at a higher elevation, which causes octane ratings to drop. I've been running 89 or higher the entire trip, and then now I've got a tank of pretty well just 87, and we're up at a higher elevated area. I just hope that it doesn't get worse, and that when we get to a lower elevation, it smoothens out again, because it wasn't doing it even at the start of the drive along here. And it's only doing it in lean burn mode too, so I don't know. It just kind of sucks. A little something to worry about. And we're in Ontario. We're not turning around at this point, so. But yeah, I mean, if that EGR plate needs to be cleaned again, I can't get another gasket for it. I can't get another plate. And it shouldn't need to be cleaned already, unless I just didn't do a good enough job, but I don't know. Okay, we're going into lean burn mode now. It's feeling alright right now. I did put just a touch bit more oil in as well, just in case, because the oil level looked good, but it wasn't, the second dot wasn't full, so maybe a touch low. I don't know, we'll see what happens. Well, I don't want to celebrate too early, but I'm not having any hesitancy in lean burn mode now. I mean, it's only been like 2 minutes since I recorded that initial concerned thing. But yeah, I mean, when I was recording that, there was like a hard thing, or like a hard misfire kind of feeling. Maybe whatever was causing that got pushed through the system. Maybe it was a little bit of a debris that was clogged got pushed through. Maybe it did just need that tiny touch bit more of oil, and there was like an air pocket of, I don't know, but maybe it just needed to cool off too, because I just let the engine cool off, sat for a little bit. I don't know, but I'm not seeming to have any misfire now, so, or hesitancy. I don't think it's actually a misfire, it's just kind of like hesitancy. It's carbon buildup, I believe, is what causes it, so. Yeah, I don't know. All seems to be good now, though. I'm probably celebrating way too early, though.
After Terrace Bay, there really wasn't much to stop at. I wasn't hungry, the car was running smoothly again, all was good. But my gas leg was going numb on me again for some reason. Eventually, like around Wawa, I caved in and stopped on the side of the road to stretch for a little bit. But I guess I didn't stretch quite enough because it wasn't long before that leg was going numb on me again. At this point, I was honestly just ready to be in Sault-Ste-Marie, a place that I always thought was in Quebec for some reason. There may not have been many other cars on the road, but there were quite a few semi-trucks, and even though I thought semis had their speeds monitored and limited, pretty well every single one of them was going at least 20 over. Maybe the speed limiter's at 110? Because up until Ontario, I'd generally been keeping pace with the trucks and often passing them. But in Ontario, they've all been passing me. So it was becoming quite stressful when I'd see a semi appear in my rearview mirror, especially if there wasn't a passing lane coming up soon. At one point, when I knew there wasn't going to be a passing lane for several kilometers, I pulled over on the shoulder to let a truck by, and they tapped their brakes to the tune of "thank you" after passing, which put a big stupid smile on my face. Eventually, I did reach Sault-Ste-Marie, and it wasn't in Quebec. And the hotel rooms were also priced significantly lower than in Dryden. I actually wound up in a room with 2 beds because it was all that was available, but thankfully they were willing to charge me just the single room fee. Honestly, it was a step up from the Dryden room too, despite being in a lower grade hotel chain. As I was walking to the room, the whole building felt like it was swaying. I felt like I was on a boat. I guess spending over 10 hours in a small car listening to relatively loud music can be somewhat disorienting. In total, I drove 1,048 kilometers today, so a little less than the past few days, although it felt like the longest stint. But maybe that's just a culmination of multiple long days of driving catching up to me. I averaged 3.5 liters per 100 kilometers today, which, considering the amount of uphill, is really solid. For the full trip so far, I'm back to 3.6, right where we started. I only had a roughly 8-hour drive to complete today, so I was in less of a rush to get going, and wasn't on the road until nearly 8:30. While the hotel room may have been nicer, the free breakfast in Sault-Ste-Marie was a significant downgrade. Just the standard make-it-yourself free hotel breakfast, only the pancake machine, the best part, was broken. So I settled for a sad, barely toasted English muffin with eggs of dubious quality and some sad, barely toasted toast. At least the orange juice was acceptable. But this was it. I was making it to Welland tonight. Cass was at work until 6, so I wasn't feeling too worried about making good time. It was just going to be a nice, casual cruise. My first stop of the day was a park by Lake Lausanne, where I stretched my legs with a little swing break, because I guess there's something about Ontario that makes your gas leg go numb, since I was already dealing with that issue pretty well right out of the gate. From there, I didn't go too far. I decided to take a lunch break in Sudbury, although honestly that may have been somewhat of a mistake. For one thing, I'd been having a super efficient morning and was sitting at a 3.4 liter per 100 kilometer average until winding up in some abysmal stop and go traffic in Sudbury, all because I just had to get to an A&W, I guess. Although I'm sure I would have wound up at 3.5 regardless once I hit the freeways, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about A&W a bit first, shall we? I used to be big into A&W as a kid, so much so I wanted my first job to be working there as the ketchup dispenser. Like, I'd stand next to the ketchup dispenser and dispense ketchup into the little ketchup cups for people. It might not have been an existing position, but I was going to make it one. Although it is so satisfying to dispense ketchup, people would probably just want to do it themselves anyways. But that's beside the point. At some indiscernible point in my past, my love for dear old Allen and Wright faded into obscurity, and it became probably my least frequented fast food place. But this trip changed that. Their fries are subpar, and the food isn't really much better or worse than anywhere else. And I'm not really a fan of root beer. I read this thing on Reddit back in high school about root beer tasting like mouthwash, and I've never been able to fully escape that since. Going through the drive-thru A&W is nothing to write home about, but if you dine in, it's a whole other story. The root beer may taste like mouthwash in the drive-thru paper cups, but in a chilled glass mug, it's magical. Dine in A&W is a utopian fast food experience. The chilled glass mugs, the aluminum trays, the little tiny fry basket you get your fries in, it's all so perfect. It's what people imagined fast food could be. But A&W isn't forever, nor are they sponsoring me in any capacity. So once I'd finished my burger, fries, and root beer, I decided to meander on over to the nearby Toys R Us and Best Buy to stretch my perpetually self-numbing leg before getting back on the road. It is kinda sad how stores across the country are all the same. Here I am in Ontario, and while this Toys R Us and Best Buy may have a slightly different layout and a slightly different selection of inventory than the stores near me, the feeling is largely the same. The Toys R Us did have these super cute Pokemon Squishmallows, which those things just kind of popped out of nowhere and suddenly everyone loves them. I was kind of tempted by the Snorlax, but I also wasn't about to shell out $30 on one. There were also a couple cool Hot Wheels, but I just wasn't in a money-spending mood, I suppose. The only notable thing about the Best Buy was how uncomfortable it was being immediately asked upon entering what I was there for. That and seeing Tears of the Kingdom for sale, it didn't feel like that game would ever come out, or have a name of its own beyond sequel to Breath of the Wild. Although now that it is out, I don't even own it, and I played it like once, so... Thankfully, the traffic was significantly less backed up on the way out of Sudbury, and soon I was back on the road to Welland. I didn't stop again until a gas station near Georgian Bay, and it was around here where the magnitude of what I was doing began to set in. I was driving across the country to hang out with a friend of mine that I had barely seen in the last 3 years. It didn't feel like that big of a deal to me, but I guess it kind of is. Were we still going to connect as naturally as we had in the past? Was I going to feel like I was imposing? Was I imposing myself into this situation? All I could do now was just keep going and hope all would be good. I'd kind of made it too far to not show up at this point. And soon, the lanes began to multiply, and I found myself in fairly dense traffic, with cars all around me. I just did my best to stick to the middle lane and let people by. It felt like what I imagined the enduro races must be like for the slower cars. Just stick to your line and give space to the faster cars to get around you. But honestly, I was super impressed with how the Insight was handling the freeways. I mostly just left it in 5th gear and drove it like an EV. If I needed to speed up to pass somebody, I'd just give it a little more gas, the electric assist would kick in, and I'd get the little bit of extra power needed. If I needed to slow down, I'd just let off the gas, the regen would kick in, and I'd slow down. I'd still give the brake pedal a little tap here and there, just so that the people behind me knew I'd be slowing down, but it was largely one-pedal driving along the freeway, which was honestly kind of fun. I could see myself really growing to enjoy this kind of driving if I lived out here. I could even see myself enjoying an EV along roads like this, although I still wouldn't want to give up my gears. Once I turned off the 407, it shocked me just how quickly the scenery changed from skyscrapers and highways to nature and vineyards. The cityscape is cool, but a more natural landscape is beautiful. It really was amazing though just how quickly things went from big city to rustic small town. I almost felt back at home, and I was only 5 minutes off a major highway. I made it to Cass's place around 7:40 after driving 837 kilometers and averaging 3.5 liters per 100 kilometer. The total trip out to Welland was about 4,866 kilometers, and I averaged 3.6 for that. I didn't actually keep track of how much gas I used, but if you take the total distance traveled and the average fuel economy, I used roughly 175 liters. I spent $310.98, so that equates to about an average of $1.77 per liter. Gas prices never really got to a point that I'd call cheap anywhere in the country, not even Alberta. It was just less expensive. So as it stands, driving is definitely not the most cost-effective or time-effective way to get across the country. But, for me at least, it is the most fun-effective way. And hey, I made it! Tomorrow, Cass and I are headed to Canada's Wonderland, and it should be a great time.
Well, I recorded next to nothing of my time in Welland beyond the memories that I recorded internally in my brain. I was just focused on enjoying the moment, and thankfully that little bit of worry that I had on the drive down melted away almost instantly, and I had a really fantastic time with Cass, and their roommate Victor, who's also pretty cool. While I was there, it felt like, since I'd driven here, I could just easily drive back. I mean, my car was parked just outside. How far from home could I possibly be? It was as if the inside of my car was still BC. It was just the world outside of it that had changed. But man, I had such a blast. On Friday, we went to Canada's Wonderland, where I almost blacked out on the new roller coaster, the Yukon Striker, which I'm glad I went on. It's a pretty cool roller coaster, but it's definitely far from my favorite there. I think that would have to go to Behemoth or the mighty Canadian Mindbuster. Wooden roller coasters are just so much fun. There were a bunch of teens there who kept jumping ahead in line, and that was kind of frustrating and kind of bizarre. Cass and I were joking about, like, isn't Canada's Wonderland target demographic like businessmen? Shouldn't the lines just be full of people in business suits making business calls on their business phones with their business briefcases, waiting to take their business roller coaster ride, you know? But yeah, I mean, Canada's Wonderland was a blast. It was super, super fun. I love roller coasters, I love amusement parks, so it was a good time, and it was fun to spend the day with Cass as well. And then after spending the day at Canada's Wonderland, we went to a little party with some of Cass's friends, and that was a lot of fun too. There's this guy Brian there who had like an emotional meltdown over barbecue and cheese sauce pizza. It was hilarious. It was a good time. And I'll probably never see any of those people ever again, and I mean, that's kind of sad, but you know, at least I got to have a fun night. It was a good time. And then on Saturday, Cass had to work in the mornings, so I went for a little walk in the woods in the Welland area, which, other than the ground being largely clay instead of dirt, it felt just like this. It felt like I was back at home in the trails on the island, and that was really nice. After that, I drove out to Hamilton to have some burgers with my cousin Corey, his wife, and his kid, and again, because I'd driven there, it felt like I could just drive back out and do this again some other weekend, but, you know, obviously that's not that feasible. It would be nice if it was though, because it was honestly really enjoyable. Corey and I used to have sleepovers every time I'd go out to visit my dad's family, and we'd stay up playing N64 Mario Kart, and it was a great time, and it was really nice just reconnecting. Yeah, it was really nice. I wish that I could just drive out to this place more easily. Then on Sunday, I started the day off by changing my oil and rotating the tires of the Insight on the side of the street in front of Cass's house before the two of us left for Clifton Hill, where we did the go-karts, the glow-in-the-dark mini-golf, went to the giant arcade, and of course checked out Niagara Falls, all before heading back to Welland to watch Fast X at a drive-in theater with Victor and a few of his friends. And with this being a Fast and Furious movie at a drive-in theater, it was really just a car meet with a movie to boot. And a lot of people were interested in the Insight, although, as always seems to be the case for whatever reason, everyone thought it was a CRZ. I really don't understand that. When the movie was about to start, the radio station that the music was supposed to be coming through, or that the sound was supposed to be coming through, was just playing random music. And then the screen went black, and everyone lost it and just started laying on their horns. One guy started revving his engine until smoke was coming out of the hood. It was hilarious. We were just killing ourselves laughing. It was honestly probably the best part of the movie. I mean, I gave my horn a couple honks there too, but it was just good fun. When I first got out to Welland, it felt like I had a pretty good number of days to spend with Cass, but by Sunday, the day before I was set to drive out to Montreal, it had started to set in that after I left, we might not see each other again for another year, maybe longer, and who knows if I'll get to see Victor again, and I can pretty much guarantee I'll probably never get to see any of the other people that I got to meet ever again, and that's sad. It was a great time, but it was gone way too soon. Although, I guess I'd rather feel that way than feel that it dragged on. I honestly really enjoyed my time in Welland, and I liked Welland a lot too, although maybe I just liked it because I was able to spend time with Cass there again. I really miss being able to spend time with Cass whenever we wanted. They're a great friend, and I really miss them. It was really nice having this weekend together, and I really hope that I'm able to do something like this again before too long, because it was a blast.
Well, my time in Welland has come to a close. I didn't really want to leave, but I also wanted to see Max, and time was running out to make that work. So I left around 11:30ish, only to realize about 20 minutes into my drive that I'd left my phone charger behind. So I had to turn back around and convince myself to leave all over again. But eventually, I was on the road and on my way to Montreal. Once I was on the road, my main focus today was just on getting to Montreal to see Max. And it was more or less a straight shot there. I made 2 stops today, the first being at a Tim's/Wendy's in Bowmanville. I was somewhat craving McDonald's, but honestly, Wendy's has been upping their game recently and is usually actually better. Plus, I got to eavesdrop on a Wendy's manager telling 2 employees not to give out so much free food. So that made for kind of interesting entertainment for my meal. The second stop was a truck stop in Brockville, where a guy came up to me and told me how he hauls gas for a living, and 89 is just a 50-50 mix of 87 and 91, so it can sometimes be cheaper to just make the mix yourself, which, like, thanks man, but honestly with how abysmal I am at mental math, and how little of a difference it would probably make, especially considering the small tank and excellent fuel economy of the Insight, I don't think I'm going to be putting that advice into action, but thanks for looking out for me, I suppose. Quebec is definitely the province that has the most obvious shift once you've crossed the border. Leading up to Quebec, there are both French and English signs, but immediately upon crossing into the land of the French, the English signs vanish completely. The signage in general just has a bit of a different feeling to it, too. I don't really know how to explain it, beyond that the design language just feels very French. And on the highway, there is no longer just one single speed limit. There are now 2 signs, one on top of the other, a maximum speed and a minimum speed. But neither the maximum nor minimum speed had any unit of measurement listed, which, considering how close we are to the American border, seems like a slightly bad idea. I guess if you get pulled over, you could always just say that you thought the speed limit was in miles per hour and not kilometers per hour like it is everywhere else in the country. But hey, things are weird in Quebec, so who knows? In general, things just felt much more French-European in Quebec. Not just the signs, but the orientation of the traffic lights were different, and all the green lights were arrows, even if you were just continuing forward. Even the power lines had a slightly different and more European design to them than the ones in Ontario. I do have to say though, driving a low car with an aggressively rigged windshield Having the traffic lights mounted horizontally makes it nearly impossible to see any of them. When they're mounted vertically, like normal traffic lights, I can at least see the bottom light without needing to crane my neck. But anyway, I got into Montreal around 7:30, found a spot to park my car, and then Max and I walked around the city for a little while before getting some pizza, because clearly I haven't had enough pizza yet on this trip. Oh, wait, I guess I actually never got into that, did I? When I first arrived in Welland, it was a Thursday, so of course we got some pizza. Then when we went to Canada's Wonderland, we had pizza, and then at Cass's friend's party, they ordered in pizza. So, for my first 24 hours in Welland, I was sustained off of pure pizza. As one should be, honestly. In total today, I drove 706 kilometers, so a pretty short day by the standards set thus far by this trip. I averaged 3.6 liters per 100 kilometers, which I know I could have gotten down had I been less focused on just getting to Montreal, but hey, 3.6 is still far from inefficient. For the total trip, I'm also sitting at 3.6. There really wasn't anything specific I wanted to do in Montreal, as there had been in Welland, beyond just spending time with Max. So we decided to spend our day driving out to some of the smaller townships in the Montreal area. We went for a fairly long walk/hike in a place whose name I can't remember before heading out to Magog, the land of Big Lou. This is a cat Twitter reference that I'm sure no one will get. In Magog, I had possibly the best Subway sandwich I've ever had. The guy preparing it was a true sandwich artist. He put extra cheese on, carefully selected only the finest tomatoes, and asked if I wanted more of each topping. He should be given at least a 50-cent raise, maybe even 75 cents, honestly. In the evening, we went and hung out with Jay and Isaac of Walker and Wild, and Nelson, who's not in the band. And all three of them were super nice. We played Smash Bros and Mario Kart, and it was just all around a great time. Even though I knew I wanted to leave stupidly early the next morning, I didn't want to go. I could have stayed there all night. I wish I could just go and hang out, talk about music, play games, and just joke around with such a great group of guys on a regular basis. Max sure is lucky to have found such a great group, and if they weren't on the opposite side of the country, I'd love to come and join in from time to time too. I got maybe an hour and a half of sleep on Max's floor last night before hitting the road just before 2 a.m. this morning. Honestly, I was feeling much more tired after waking up than before I'd gone to sleep. Maybe I should have just not slept. Oh well, it's too late to change that now. I was kind of surprised by the number of cars on the road in Montreal at 2 a.m. I mean, it wasn't a lot, but it was more than I'd expect at that hour. As I was leaving the city, two vehicles just ripped right by me, and as soon as they passed, the one in the rear put on their lights, revealing themselves to be a cop. Kinda clever that they waited until passing me and the few other cars on the road before lighting up. Gotta keep that slow-moving traffic safe, I guess. I'm pretty sure that later on in the day, that same truck sped past me again, so getting pulled over did not change their driving habits. If anything, now they had to speed more to make up for the time lost by getting pulled over. So far, the weather has been nothing but perfect for my entire trip, but this is Canada, so of course that wasn't going to remain the case. And sure enough, this morning, it was raining. You know, Quebec might have worse roads than Manitoba, because holy, this is insane. Like, all morning it's just been like, I almost feel like I'm driving on a flat tire. And man, I was tired. Being in the rain and before too long the snow wasn't helping either. I had to pull over a couple times and take little cat naps across the front seats of the Insight just to keep myself from dozing off behind the wheel. I had a feeling that getting some food in me might help wake me up, but I was driving through small cities in Quebec, so everyone only spoke French. And while it's true that I may have gone to French immersion since kindergarten and I am legally bilingual, Mon français n'est pas très bien. Eventually, I realized I wasn't going to be leaving the province soon enough, and I needed to get something in me. So I stopped at a gas station in Val d'Or and just did my best to say as little as possible while paying for my food. One interesting thing about the route I was taking today is that there were roundabouts on the highway. I mean, I guess it's not a major highway and roundabouts do keep traffic flowing better than traffic lights, but still, it was just kind of an interesting thing to see. But before too long, I was out of Quebec and back in Ontario, and out of the snow and back under blue skies. The reason I'd left so early this morning is because I was determined to cut Ontario down into just one stop. I was gonna make it to Thunder Bay tonight whether it killed me or not. And now that I was back in a province where I felt confident I'd be understood when I spoke, I decided it was time for lunch. So I stopped at an A&W in Cochrane. Only this A&W did not deliver the utopian fast food experience that I'd come to expect from dear old Allen and Wright. I mean, the food was honestly really good, but the dishwasher was broken, so they didn't have chilled mugs. So, because I was drinking out of a paper cup, I decided to get a Coke. Only that Coke tasted suspiciously like root beer. So I guess you're only allowed to get root beer at A&W. Even if you want something else, you're still getting root beer.
Well, that's 1,000 kilometers today, and it is only 3:09. We've still got plenty to go.
At this point, the life had come back inside of me, and I was no longer fighting against the immense weight of my eyelids. I was driving and feeling fine. The rest of the day was fairly uneventful, just a bunch of driving without any hiccups or real excitement to report. My final stop of the day was in Long Lac, where I was so caught off guard by the gas station being full service that I completely forgot about my bladder being ready to burst. So I had to make a second final stop a few kilometers later in a gravel parking lot with some bushes ripe for hiding in and peeing on. The sun was setting as I approached Thunder Bay, and I was feeling a slight bit worried about finding a place to sleep, seeing as it was nearly 10 p.m. And that worry was not misplaced, as the first two places I tried to get a room at turned me away. I was just like Mary and Joseph. Soon I'd be sleeping in a barn with a baby in a manger. Actually, I wound up staying at the Super 8, which was the most expensive hotel I've had to stay at yet. Hotels in Thunder Bay are a hot commodity, you would seem. They're high in demand and high in price. And according to the story the clerk at the Super 8 told me, also full of people getting high, so just high all round. But thanks to my BCAA membership, which I'd only just signed up to for this trip, it really wasn't that much more than the Dryden room. And it was significantly nicer. I realized I probably should have filmed the hotel rooms so I could have reviewed and compared them, because clearly this video isn't long enough already. But I forgot to film this one too, so whoops. But man, it had a cool 80s theme, and the bathroom had the same style faucet as I have at home, and I know how hard it is to keep those clean, so I was impressed. The Super 8 in Thunder Bay is worth the stay, although I left too early in the morning to get any free breakfast, so 2 points off for that. But anyway, I drove just over 1,600 kilometers today, and averaged 3.7 liters per 100 kilometers. Which was mostly due to the drive out of Montreal being really inefficient. Ontario seems to be the province that this car is happiest in, so we'll just have to see how tomorrow compares. I left Thunder Bay around 5 a.m. without a free hotel breakfast. You'd think I would have learned from yesterday, but once again I made the mistake of not grabbing anything to eat at the start of the drive and then finding myself in the middle of nowhere with little to no options. Thankfully, I still had the muffin that Victor had given me before I left Welland, so I had that for breakfast, along with the remaining sweethearts that I picked up yesterday for energy.
Google Maps really annoys me a lot of the time. Earlier today it was like, we found a faster route that saves you 2 minutes. And I'm like, okay, whatever, I didn't do anything. And now it has me going through the States. I don't want to have have to go through the border to drive in the States for like 5 minutes. So now I'm gonna have to drive up another road that's probably gonna take way longer. And stupid fucking Google Maps, I swear to God.
And even after I told Google Maps that I wanted to take the slower route and stay in Canada, it kept pinging at me every few minutes asking me to pull a U-turn and go back down the road I'd started driving on and cross the border. At first this would save me 30 minutes, then 15, 10, 5, and at that point, why are you even suggesting this alternate route to me? Is it not extremely obvious by the fact I've said no every other time you've asked and that I've continued to drive on the road I'm driving on, that I'm not interested in turning back and retracing my steps just to save maybe a half hour of my time? Beyond the frustration this caused me by interrupting my music, the way that Google Maps requires you to grab your phone and deny alternate route rerouting is honestly kind of dangerous. Maybe the programmers at Google assume you're traveling with a passenger or in a car with Google Maps built into the infotainment system. But I'm alone and being forced to take one hand off the wheel to unflip my phone and hit no on a route that I've already denied multiple times. That's dangerous, and actually illegal in Canada. So if you're a cop watching this, I pulled over every time I had to do this. That is 100% true and not a lie, I promise. But alas, that muffin and those sweethearts were not enough sustenance for the day. So once I'd made it past Kenora and Google Maps had accepted that I wouldn't be crossing into the land of the free today, I made a stop at a really big gas station in between Kenora and Winnipeg. It was massive, practically a small grocery store. It even had a little cafe in it with proper sandwiches and stuff, which is how I got a chicken bacon ranch sub. Which, and maybe this just had to do with how little food I'd eaten all day, was really, really good. Had it been warmed up, it would have just been a legitimately tasty sandwich, I think. My next stop of the day was in Winnipeg. I hate Winnipeg. Where I stopped in at a gas station to fill up and grab a Coke for energy. It was insanely windy and my hair was blowing all over the place and I was almost struggling to just stay upright. Just as I had gotten back into my car, someone pulled in next to me stupidly tightly. Had I not already been in my car, I don't know if I would have been able to get in without having to crawl in through the passenger seat or hatch. Thankfully, I was already in my car, but it was honestly kind of tricky backing out and avoiding hitting their car with how close they pulled in next to me.
This drive through Manitoba has been significantly better. The roads are a little better on this side of the road. I think it's still very rough, but there's not like 2-inch gaps in the pavement every 5 feet. There was for a little while, but not as much as there was on the other side going through. Super duper windy and still very hot in my car. So that part's still not fun, the temperature in here. But otherwise, you know, it's going better. The sky is a lot clearer. It's not as hot. It's just very windy, and the roads are still rougher than most of the other provinces.
As I made my way out of Manitoba and into Saskatchewan, the sky started to fill with dark, ominous clouds, and it looked like I may be getting a front row seat to a true prairie lightning storm. But while some rain did fall, no lightning struck and no thunder rolled. At one point, a semi-truck passed me, and as we were side by side, I felt my car almost glue itself to the side of the truck, like I was sucked into its airstream and just getting pulled along. It felt really cool and was great for fuel economy, but unfortunately, I was never able to replicate it. Must have been something special about that one truck, I guess. It was just past 7 when I made my way into Regina, where I'd be stopping in for dinner with an aunt and cousin of mine. I hadn't been to her house since elementary school, but as soon as I approached the neighborhood, it looked instantly familiar to me. We had chicken, rice, salad, and a fruit crisp for dessert, so quite a bit of food. But she made sure not to keep me long, as I was still wanting to make my way to Gull Lake, and that's still about 3 hours out from Regina. So I got back on the road around 8:30 and made my way to Gull Lake. My fuel economy was all over the place today. It started off really poorly, with the average reading being 5.1 liters per 100 kilometers for a while after leaving Thunder Bay. But soon I had it down to 4, and then 3.9 and 3.8 and so on. And by the time I'd made it into Manitoba, I had the average down to 3.4 liters per 100 kilometers. Things were really efficient at the start of the 7th most populated province, and I even managed to get the average down to 3.3. But then the speed limit changed to 110, and then Saskatchewan came along and just ruined everything I'd worked so hard for. It's weird how in the prairies, the car seems almost determined to not use the electric assist. It wants to just charge up the battery and then not use it, I guess. That and the whole province seems to be on a slight incline, so yeah, the average got all the way up to 3.7 for a while. Although I did manage to get it back down to 3.6 by the time I'd made it to Gull Lake, which was after driving 1,676 kilometers. So this was my longest day of driving, even though it didn't feel quite as extreme as yesterday. I was debating leaving stupidly early again this morning and trying to be home tonight. But I didn't want to drive on just an hour of sleep again, so I decided to save the stupidly early morning for tomorrow. Because of this, I actually had a bit of a later start today, and I wasn't on the road until just after 5 a.m. Seeing as I'd taken Highway 1 on the way out, I figured I'd see what Highway 3 had to offer me on the way back. So I started the day off by driving out to Medicine Hat to top up with gas, and was greeted by a sky full of hot air balloons. It was a really cool sight to see, and a stunning way to start the day.
Seriously, Google Maps is not my friend in this trip. It just did a little beep, didn't tell me. Every now and then it'll just give you the indication beep, but it won't tell you why. And in this case, it's because it decided...
Take the next right onto Boundary Road Southeast.
In this case, it's because it decided that it was going to change the route I was taking when I was wanting to take Highway 3 because, well, there's closures on Highway 1.
In 600 meters, turn left onto Trans-Canada Highway, Alberta 1 East.
But like, what? I think it's trying to put me on Highway 1 again. I need to check this out. Sorry, this is... Yes, I drove past the sign for Highway 3 and I'm like, okay, maybe we're just staying on Highway 1 for a little while. But nope, it had just rerouted me to take Highway 1 when I had selected Highway 3, and it did not give me any indication of that being what it was going to do. It's really frustrating, this stupid thing. I don't even know why I'm using it in this case, because I know I'm just following signs for Highway 3, so I should just follow the signs for Highway 3. Why do I trust the stupid fucking Google Maps more than my own brain?
Maybe Google Maps was just trying to help me avoid the bit of construction that started my Highway 3 stint, since that was honestly quite backed up. But regardless, it was still being a little naughty and definitely not my friend. My first real stop of the day, because Medicine Hat doesn't count, was in Fort Macleod, where I grabbed a McDonald's Coke and had the tuna sandwich my uncle had prepared for me the night before. Once I'd finished my Coke and my sandwich, I moved my car over to a more level part of the parking lot to check my oil level and tire pressure. After checking the oil, a guy in a Hyundai Ioniq 5 drove up to me and began enthusiastically telling me all sorts of stuff about my car, his car, and the poor state of EV charge stations across Canada. He spent a lot of time on the speed camera monitoring system in his car and how there's speed cameras everywhere, and they're even disguising them as other stuff, but his car can pick them all up. At one point he brought up the Ioniq 6, but he called it the Iconic 6 instead, which I thought was kind of funny, especially seeing as he was wearing an Ioniq 5 hat. So you'd think he'd be more familiar with the name than that. Which, speaking of names, he did give me his, but it was immediately lost within the crevices of my brain folds. He had a lot to say and kind of kept me a little longer than I'd wanted, but hey, it's all good. It's not like I was still trying to catch the ferry tonight. I really wasn't in any major rush. And just as I was leaving Fort Macleod, the
check engine light came on for the third time. It's been quite a while. This is the first time since like the third day of traveling, I think.
happened while I was accelerating again, after the car had been sitting for a while. And had the fans going. Let's see, come on. I'm assuming it's just the O2 sensor again, but come on, read it a little bit quicker, please. Come on, any minute now. Still got a little bit of a sinking feeling when it came on, but yep. All right, let's clear that. Unplug that. Put that back in the glove box. All right, let's get back on the road. But wow, the scenery along Highway 3 was stunning. After Fort Macleod, things quickly began to look more and more like BC, with mountains cropping up in the background. But the abundance of windmills and farmland was a firm reminder that I wasn't quite yet back in BC, though I really wasn't far off. Much like how the Old Island Highway takes longer than the Inland Highway, but feels shorter to me thanks to more varied scenery, Highway 3 may take longer than Highway 1, but with how frequently I was going in and out of little cities and towns, and how quickly the scenery started to look like home, it felt like I was making much better time than I probably actually was. Because before I knew it, I was back in BC, basically home. And soon I was in Fernie, which was really cool to see in its summer clothes. My mom's family used to meet there every other year for Christmas. It was a way for everyone to get together after my mom skipped town and moved to the island. It was chosen as a halfway point between the rest of the family in Saskatchewan and Alberta and us. But even though Fernie is in BC, we always had the longest drive. I figured the odds of me having the insight back out in Fernie again were pretty slim, especially seeing as if I were to head out there again, which I do want to do, I'd want to go in the winter, since I love their ski hill. There's this back mountain run that takes over an hour to complete with multiple lifts and a T-bar that I find to just be such a fun little adventure. But I wouldn't want to drive the inside out there in the snow. So I figured I'd head up the hill and pay the Grizz Inn, the hotel my mom's family has always stayed at, except for 1 year, which they really should have bought rooms in back in '96, but I guess that ship has long since sailed, a visit. It was kind of surreal to see the base of the ski hill covered in grass and yellow flowers. You don't really think about it when you only see somewhere covered in snow, but underneath that snow there is ground and grass in the summer, apparently. I just listened to Juno by Remy Wolf, which was recommended to me by Cass. We did listen to it while I was in Ontario as well, but I gave it a full proper solo listening here, and you can probably guess what I'm gonna say. I really enjoyed it. It's really funky, and by that I don't mean like, oh, this is funky music. Like, I mean like the genre funk is what it made me think of. I really liked the lyrics are very stream of consciousness is how I would describe it. Like, it just kind of flows together and jumps all over the place, which is really cool. It said that there's not any meaning to them, but I don't know if I'm convinced of that. I was figuring out narratives as I was listening along. Yeah, I'm probably gonna check out more of her stuff, honestly. I really enjoyed it. From there, I didn't stop again until Creston, where I went into a DQ that, according to a sign on the door, was only for service dogs. But I didn't see a single service dog in there. Just a bunch of filthy people. Disgusting! So I listened to
Scenery
by Rio Fukui. I think Max recommended this to me. Maybe it was Bobby. I don't fully remember.
was all just instrumental, so I don't really know what to say. Like, musically it was solid. It sounded good. I could tell that it was a skilled musician playing music.
Turn left onto British Columbia 3 West.
I don't know, in 400 meters I'm turning left onto British Columbia 403 West, so yeah. I don't know, I'll probably not listen to it again because I'm not big into listening to, oh, that was too early. I need to fix this.
3 West for 90 kilometers.
Yeah, I'm not really big into listening to music without lyrics, so, but you know, it was enjoyable for a drive, but because there weren't any lyrics, I was just really thinking about how I needed to pee and how I needed to eat. So, I just did that, and now I'm back on the road again.
Soon, I was beginning to grow a little concerned as the Insight was almost seeming to lose power, and the battery level was dropping rapidly. The road didn't feel that steep, but I guess I should invest in an inclinometer, if that's how you pronounce that, because it turns out I was beginning the climb to Bridal Lake, which rests at an altitude of 5,820 kilometers. I mean, hell, the lake was still partly frozen over. The battery charge was depleted pretty fast, so I spent a good chunk of the climb just crawling along at a snail's pace in second gear. Thankfully, all that hard work was rewarded with a decline where I could just let the car coast, and where regen was able to bring the battery back up to a full charge fairly quickly. But this was only the first of many mountainous climbs along the Crow's Nest Pass. Thankfully, none nearly as intense as that initial Bridal Lake climb. The uphills were a bit of a struggle, but the downhills were a lot of fun. It was almost like downhill skiing in a way, and since I could rely on regen to keep me at a reasonable pace, at least until the battery was fully charged, I didn't have to worry about gas or brakes, just coasting and steering. It was a good time.
One thing I forgot to say about the Remy Wolf album was that it sounded like morning music to me, by which I mean like Hello City, which is what I'm listening to now, or ELO. Something that gets you pumped up and ready to take on the day. It just has like a happy kind of goofy, good energy to it. Yeah.
I hadn't topped up with gas since Medicine Hat this morning, and as I was making the descent into Osoyoos, I only had 2 bars of fuel left. But once in Osoyoos, I had to stop at a red light. And I guess the battery isn't the only thing capable of recharging itself, because suddenly I had 3 bars of fuel again. So I figured why not see if I could make this magically reappearing 3rd bar last all the way until Penticton. Things were looking pretty good for that 3rd bar of fuel. I passed a sign indicating 63 kilometers to go and it was still there. Then 55 kilometers to go and it was still there. Then I entered Oliver and it was still there. But with less than 10 kilometers to go, that 3rd bar of fuel decided it had stuck around long enough. And I entered Penticton with only 2 bars of fuel. In total today, I drove 1,179 kilometers, which, you know, isn't too shabby for 1 tank of gas. And seeing as each of those bars in the fuel gauge typically more or less equate to 100 kilometers, I still had another 100 to 200 kilometers I could have gone. I averaged 3.4 liters per 100 kilometers along this stint, which again is really solid when you consider just how much hill climbing I had to do today. Sure, each of those climbs was followed up with some nice coasting, but that doesn't fully zero out the effects of climbing up multiple mountains. The total trip average is still 3.6, surprising absolutely no. And this was it. I would be home before sundown tonight. I was back in BC and just wanting to get home to see Broccoli. The longest I'd been away from him in the past was 1 week, and he was absolutely glued to my side when I got back from that. I did try to explain to him what would be happening, but I have a feeling he might not have fully understood what I'd said. Cats, am I right? Anyway, I had set my alarm for 11:40 p.m. and was on the road just after midnight, with the goal of making it to the ferry terminal in Vancouver in time for the 6:25 a.m. sail. The Insight did not seem very happy with me as we were making our way out of Penticton. I'm not sure if the first few climbs are significantly steeper or something, but it was struggling to hold speed on ground that really did not seem that far off from flat to me. Although that's the same thing I thought while climbing up to Dryden Lake, so what do I know? There was one point where I really felt like I was accelerating, only the speedometer was moving backwards for whatever reason. Thankfully, it wasn't too long before things started to feel normal again, so I suspect the roads were just a tad steeper than my eyes perceived them to be. Unsurprisingly, the roads were virtually empty. Even as I approached and drove through Vancouver, it was rare to see much traffic beyond the odd semi-truck. And I made it to the ferry terminal with time to spare, right around 4:30, actually 6 minutes ahead of Google Maps' predicted arrival time, which is rare for me, especially if I'm driving the Insight. And the ferry terminal wasn't even open yet. Turns out they don't start selling tickets until 5:25. So I stretched my legs out, pulled out my Switch, and ran laps around Baby Park as I waited. But before too long, a bunch of people wearing BC Ferries uniforms began to populate the area, and soon I'd purchased a ticket and was making my way down towards the big boat. We boarded slightly ahead of schedule and set sail across the sea. On the way out, on the ferry, I got a bacon and egg breakfast sandwich, and it was one of the saddest breakfast sandwiches I've ever had the displeasure of consuming. The egg was thinner than a nickel, the English muffin dry, and the bacon was barely discernible. I was weary to get another, but the eggs Benny was too expensive, and frankly I wasn't convinced that it would be any better. So I rolled my dice and got another breakfast sandwich, though with ham instead of bacon this time. And it was significantly better. I mean, I still wouldn't write home about it, but I would apparently include it in a script for a needlessly long video about a road trip that no one's gonna watch. So that's gotta mean something. Beyond the better breakfast sandwich, this ferry ride just felt a little off. I kept hearing crashing noises and the boat didn't seem to be sailing perfectly level or straight. But we didn't sink, so I guess everything was hunky-dory. The difference in daylight between boarding and departure was kind of insane. And it felt much later in the day to me than just after 8 a.m., though I guess that's what happens when you get up just before midnight after only sleeping for a couple of hours. It felt almost surreal to be back on such familiar streets after so long driving in all sorts of new and unfamiliar places. I made my way through Nanaimo and soon I was cruising along the Old Island Highway. That's a drive I always enjoy, especially in the Insight. And today it felt like a nice warm hug welcoming me back home. The one thing that wasn't nice to come back home to were the gas prices. When I left, it was $1.78 and slowly dropping, and now it's $1.89 and rising.
Okay, I just listened to AJJ's new album, Disposable Everything, which came out either today or yesterday. This was recommended to me by no one, other than AJJ themselves, and I guess myself. And this is actually the third time I listened to it today. The first time was in the morning, and then second time, well, it's still the morning. It's only 9:47 right now, but you know what I mean. I have a feeling this album's gonna grow on me. The first
Well, I drove 568 kilometers today and averaged 3.5 liters per 100 kilometer. I had a hard morning with the average getting all the way up to 4.1, but once I'd made my way through the worst of the Okanagan Hills, I was able to drop that down fairly quickly and had it back to 3.6 by the ferry terminal. The drive home from there is familiar and, when all the stars align just right, can be hyper efficient. And today, for the most part, it was. I was able to get the average down to 3.4. But on one final hill climb up to my house, it jumped back to 3.5. Ah well. As I'm sure you can no doubt guess, the total average for the trip is still 3.6 liters per 100 kilometers. So on the way back, I drove 5,734 kilometers. Since I didn't keep track of how much gas I used, and I only have the total trip average, my calculations for fuel usage may be slightly off, but it really shouldn't be by that much. Taking the total trip fuel economy and distance traveled, I used roughly 206 liters of gas. I spent $358.49 on gas on the way back, which means I paid on average $1.74 per liter. So for the full trip, I drove around 10,600 kilometers, but I don't think that's including the little bit of extra driving I did while I was in Welland and Montreal. And I spent $669.47 on gas in total.
Well, it's been a while now since I made this trip, and I'm still so incredibly glad that I did. It was an absolutely unforgettable experience, and one that, had I not done it when I did, likely wouldn't have wound up happening for another 3 or 4 years. On top of that, this project of turning the trip into a video, something I thought might take a month or 2, but has now almost taken 8, allowed these memories to stay with me a lot longer than they would have normally. And while that does run the risk of me becoming the guy who won't shut up about the one time they did that big trip, why shouldn't I stay with the excitement? If something makes you happy, be happy about it, goddammit! I'm not sure I'll ever financially recover from this, although granted at this point there are several other factors at play in my poor financial situation. But if I ever do have enough stability to do something like this again, I'd absolutely love to. It doesn't need to be another full cross-country jaunt, but something that involves leaving the island and has at least a solid day or 2 of driving would be nice to do. I really enjoyed waking up each day and knowing the only thing I had to do was make it somewhere else. There was no pressure to be productive or sense of guilt at sundown. It was freeing and just really, really fun. And I'm so glad that I got to do this trip in my Insight, because this really is what that car was designed to do. Just drive large distances with little to no stopping throughout the day. And I really hope this is only the first of many road trips that I get to do in this car. Of course, getting to spend time with Cass, Max, my cousin Corey, and a few other family members too was really nice, and it felt so easy to just go back out and visit them again while I was there. I wish it was. And the new people I met too were all just fantastically nice. All in all, this was just a fantastic experience. And if it seems like something you think you'd enjoy, I highly recommend taking the plunge and making it happen. I'm sure glad that I did. Sure, you might be in financial ruin for a few years to come, but hey, you were gonna be anyways. That's modern capitalism for you. Anyways, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the future. Whew.